Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
Over the years, I've criticized just about every brand for making what are seemingly confusing decisions, where in particular, as of late, Puma is a brand where you kind of have to question who's calling the shots. With the boots in this box actually being really good and something that I think a lot of us have been asking for, but given the timing of the new synthetic Puma King 20, it has to be one of the most confusing drops we've seen in quite some time. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new and limited edition Puma King Platinum Pantera Negra, which translates to Black Panther. That being the nickname given to Portuguese legend Eusébio, of which these boots pay tribute to, specifically to him winning the Ballon d'Or in 1965, which is also the reason why this football boot has been limited to 1,965 pairs worldwide, all of which are available for the retail price of $220. However, you might notice something distinctly different about this particular pair of Puma Kings, where unlike the last 3 generations of King, where Puma have been pushing this synthetic over natural leather concept, this Frankenstein Puma King Platinum remake features a super soft natural cow leather upper. And despite its limited quantities, it also retails for the same price as the new King 20. We're not to be too critical of Puma because, let's be real, this situation isn't that different from what Adidas is doing with the modern Predator being synthetic and then all the remakes being available in leather. Why not give us a modern leather option in the Predator all the time? However, this really does go against what they've been pushing for several years now, and the fact that they are just all of a sudden making a leather Puma King at the same time that they've just launched their new synthetic one, that's a confusing decision. In saying that, it's also interesting to note that despite the super limited quantities and honestly really fair retail price that they're asking for this boot, it's been out for a week and a half or so now, and every single size is still available. So is there really that much demand for a real leather Puma King, or are people just screaming for something that they're not actually interested in buying? Just something to think about. With all that said, we're gonna break down all the details of this new King Platinum sort of remake, but kind of its own thing altogether, going over the good, the bad, how they fit and feel on feet, and whether or not, if you're on the market for a pair of leather football boots, despite the limited quantities, they are still available, so should you go out and buy the latest natural leather Puma King? We're going to talk about all that and more, so if you're interested in learning everything there is to know, please stick around and watch the entire review, and if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the first link down below. And as always, if you guys enjoy the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video, and if you appreciate the unsponsored, unsugar-coated, brutally honest opinions on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. Where first things first, I just wanted to do a quick side-by-side between an OG Puma King Platinum and what is more or less being presented as a remake, where in terms of the concept of a thin leather upper with no stitching reinforced by an internal support cage, this is more or less a remake of the OG, but at the same time, it's kind of based more so on the outgoing Puma King Ultimate, which of course is a K-Better synthetic upper football boot. That's where the Soleplate tooling comes from. It's not from the OG King Platinum, which means that this new version is nowhere near as light. And you'll also notice that unlike the original King Platinum, this actually features a more traditional U-throat construction and standalone tongue. In other words, while these two boots do share a similar aesthetic, they are ultimately quite a bit different from each other. Where if we start with the upper, it features a material that's being presented as a premium cow leather, where I know there's going to be plenty of people that will be disappointed that it's not kangaroo leather like the OG King Platinum. However, from a softness perspective, I would argue that this is every bit as good if not better. It's a little bit thicker than what you found on the OG King Platinum, but it also seems to have much less reinforcement, particularly in the toe box and forefoot area, where if you're looking for that out of the box, super soft and pliable feel that you expect from kind of an old school leather football boot, you definitely get that here from the return of the King Platinum. Having said that, it does have some chunkiness to it in regards to how they've gone about constructing this boot, where I do get it's supposed to be a tribute to Eusébio from 1965, so maybe they wanted to make things a little bit more old school, but I'm not in love with the giant stitch that goes along kind of the lacing system on both the lateral and medial side. And then you also have the large Puma form stripe with a big seam right here that, again, if you put it side by side with the synthetic King Platinum that was just recently replaced, you're going to notice a lot of the same components have kind of stitching in the same area. Where I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is kind of a leather interpretation of the synthetic King Ultimate, but it kind of is. Where it's kind of hard to see on video, but you can kind of make out the internal support cage that flows throughout the softest part of the upper. Everything from the form stripe back is a little bit of a thicker, firmer, more structured material. This area in particular on both the lateral and medial side is an actual synthetic. But if you're looking for that super soft, all over leather sensation, this definitely delivers on that, and at a price tag that is less expensive than what you'll pay for most top-end models. It's super soft on foot. It gives you that soft, natural leather touch on the ball. There's not really any extra grip to be had given the very basic leather grain finish on the surface. And because of that nice deep central lacing system and traditional U-throat construction, the boot as a whole does have that kind of old school feel, but of course with a bit of a modern twist. Speaking of the tongue, it's actually really nice. And on the surface, it looks like it's entirely made out of natural leather, and that's because there is some natural leather as part of the construction, but the base material for the tongue is a synthetic microfiber that admittedly is just super soft and pliable, but it also has the right amount of structure where it just feels comfortable against your foot and matches the thickness of the rest of the upper. So really well designed in that regard, and I particularly like the little split directly in the middle that allows it to kind of sit nice and flat against kind of the front part of your ankle as it transitions up your leg. Moving to the rear, you're going to find what is a pretty standard low cut construction, and again, a design that doesn't stray too far away from the King Ultimate that I think this design is more or less based off of, but at the same time, it does share some visual and design similarities to that of the OG King Platinum. Disappointingly though, while it does have plenty of padding, they've chosen to line the heel in this really slick, kind of smooth synthetic leather material, which isn't necessarily bad, but it is certainly on the slippery side, where in particular, because of this heel liner, I would recommend using grip socks just to have the best possible lockdown. Not that it's necessarily a major issue, but certainly if you're comparing this to the heel design of a lot of other football boots, particularly ones in the leather category, I would say that this is one of the bigger areas of letdown for this design. And then the insole, fully removable, I'll give you guys a quick look at that. It features a really soft kind of microfiber liner on the surface, which we've seen from Puma as well as other brands many times before. And then it's made from a single layer of black foam with these perforated yellow foam inserts in the heel, forefoot, and toe box area for a little bit of additional cushion. All in all though, it's a pretty standard football boot insole. And then moving to the base, the sole plate and stud pattern tooling has been completely recycled, again from the recently replaced Puma King Ultimate, where I honestly don't have any issues with this particular sole plate design. My criticism would be that it's maybe not as light as it should be for a modern sole plate in general, given that it's not overly responsive, it's not particularly comfortable in terms of feel, and the traction on offer is on the traditional side with really no special quirks whatsoever. given that this is supposed to be a remake of the King Platinum, I definitely think they should have reused the OG King Platinum sole plate and stud pattern, just because I think it was better in terms of feel and certainly a lot lighter. But given this style of football boot, I actually think that this sole plate and stud pattern works better on this leather Puma King than it ever did on the synthetic version. In other words, it's well suited for this style of football boot, where if you're expecting something relatively traditional, that's exactly what you're going to get. And I do like the fact that it still has that external heel counter as a part of the design. It is also worth noting that it's technically FG-AG, where I don't think that you would be unsafe to wear this on artificial grass, but it must be said, the studs are certainly on the longer side. So if you're playing on artificial grass that is a bit shallower, you could potentially run into some issues with instability and even stud pressure in the long term. All in all though, anything with rounded studs is going to be safer to use on artificial grass rather than blades. And then when it comes to weight, while I don't think somebody interested in a blackout leather pair of Puma Kings is going to be overly concerned about a couple extra grams, I still think it's interesting to see how they stack up against not only the OG King Platinum and kangaroo leather, but also the new synthetic direction of the King in the King 20 Ultimate. These two in a size 10 US, this OG King Platinum in a 9.5. We're gonna throw them all on the scale, starting off with the OG King Platinum, which was actually a pretty lightweight football boot. They weigh in at 7.6 ounces, the equivalent of 215 grams. Remember those numbers, and we'll throw on the new King Platinum remake, if we can even call it that, and you can see that they weigh in significantly more, 9.3 ounces or 263 grams. We'll change the scale back to ounces one last time, and we'll throw on the new synthetic King, and you can see that they weigh in at 8.9 ounces, the equivalent of 252 grams. Meaning that these are the heaviest of the bunch, certainly a lot heavier than an OG King Platinum, but only within a couple grams of the new King 20 Ultimate in synthetic. Long story short, if you're looking for a super lightweight feel, while these aren't necessarily heavy, they're also not overly light. When it comes to the fit and feel on feet, I actually think these are quite comfortable, although like I mentioned earlier, I'm not in love with the design and feel of the heel. I think had they reduced the padding a little bit and gone with kind of a micro suede as a liner rather than this smooth, somewhat slippery synthetic leather, the boots as a whole would have just been more comfortable, and the lockdown in the heel would also be a little bit more secure, which you kind of need with the boot as unstructured as this leather upper is, where if you're hoping for lockdown and responsiveness, this is obviously not going to be a fantastic choice, but at the same time, they don't necessarily feel sloppy on your feet either. What I will say that's kind of a little bit weird is that when you hold the boot in hand, the leather seems so thin and so soft and so pliable, where you really think you're gonna have this almost barefoot leather-like experience. But when you actually get the boots on your feet, because of all the seams, especially the area across the top of the foot with those two little panels where the lace holes are positioned, the boots have this weird thin but also kind of bulky sensation on feet, not to the point where they feel stiff or uncomfortable, don't get me wrong there, but the touch on the ball is not quite as thin as you might anticipate based on how they feel in hand. Where they do ultimately feel really well put together, the internal reinforcement support cage I think does a good job of giving you structure in the areas where it's definitely needed. The deep central lacing system allows for great overall adjustability, and the shaping of the boot is closer to the new King 20 Ultimate than it is the OG King Platinum or the King Ultimate that was just recently replaced, that this design in a lot of ways feels largely based off of, which also means that from a width perspective, these have plenty of width pretty much all the way through, where if you did have wide feet, I don't think these would be a bad choice at all. If you had really narrow feet, you might run into some minor issues, but for the most part, they should work for most people. And as far as sizing is concerned, I grabbed these in a size 10, which is half a size larger than I would normally do, anticipating that the shaping would be more similar to that of the new King 20. And I have to say, I think I was correct in that, as you can see, even though they're half a size up, which you typically wouldn't do in a natural leather football boot, my toes are right at the end with no extra space whatsoever. That is not to say that I couldn't have gone true to size and just had the leather stretch, which it definitely will stretch as you wear them in, but unless you want your boots to fit skin tight, I would definitely recommend going up half a size, just like the new King 20, for this limited edition variant. Although, because these are very soft natural leather, if you're currently wearing your boots with some extra space, then just going true to size for this particular model is probably the way to go, just because you're going to want to eliminate any extra space, especially in the toe box and forefoot area, so you don't run into issues with the boots overstretching. So in conclusion, despite the fact that I think this is a very confusing drop from Puma given the synthetic direction of the King series, I do think this is a really solid leather football boot, but with one fatal flaw, and for me, that is the fit and feel of the heel area in comparison to other leather football boot options and even Puma's own King 20 Ultimate with a synthetic upper. Had they given it that design in the heel versus this one, these would just be 10 times better. Having said that, fit and feel is going to vary a lot from person to person and is ultimately, no pun intended, subjective, where I think if these do fit you properly and you really like the sensation of a relatively thin and super unstructured natural leather football boot with overall a more traditional construction, I think there's a lot to like about these, and for $220, they're not a bad deal, especially given the limited edition exclusivity that comes along with it. But if it came down to it and I had to pick a new pair of natural leather football boots for myself, I'd still pick a pair of Mizuno Morelias, whether they were Morelia 2 Elites or of course the Made in Japan variation. I'd still probably have a Copa Icon 2 at $180 versus $220 for these. And honestly, even given the choice of Puma King, I hate to say this, but I'd probably have the synthetic King 20 Ultimate over this King Platinum remake. Well, don't get me wrong, I think this is the best natural leather Puma King model since the 2019 King Platinum, and to some people, this might just be the perfect leather football boot, but for me personally, that's just not the case. Where if you've been waiting for a high quality natural leather Puma King to drop, these are definitely worth a shot, but if you're just after a pair of leather football boots, I do think there are other options to consider.